Hello everybody, welcome to my workshop. My name is Caden. Today I'm going to be making a new forge. So this is my current forge. It works fine, works just fine. Problem being is that I need to heat treat this sword, and this forge is nowhere near long enough for doing that. So I'm going to be making a sort of, I guess, two forges really, and they're going to be able to be kind of just put next to each other to have a super long forge that I can heat treat swords in, or I can take them apart and just have two smaller forges. To start with, I'll show you what I've got to make the forge with, and then we'll just sort of jump right into it. So as far as the materials go, we've got a big argon bottle that's going to become the body of the forge. We've got our, it's not exactly a material, but devil forge burner. Used them before, they work really well. And we have a box full of kale wool. So kale wool is a ceramic blanket that sort of forms the lining of the forge. Only problem with it is it's carcinogenic if it gets airborne, so it's also going to be coated in a layer of refractory to keep all those fibers in. My first step is going to be marking out my distance for the bottles, and I'm going to do one slightly shorter one and one slightly longer one, and then I'm going to basically chop them. Very kindly, the person who owned the argon bottle before they gave it to me cut it in half, so I don't have to do one cut, but I get to do two more. It shouldn't be too hard, it'll just take a while, a lot of angle grinding, so we'll get on to doing that. Alright, so our next step for the bottle, now that it's been cut, is to clean up all the edges, chamfer all the corners just so that I don't cut myself if I'm packing it full of kale wool, and just generally even everything out. Once we've got everything evened out, I'm going to figure out where the burner holes are going to go, and then we'll figure out a way to get those burner holes in there. So that's the next step. So we have cleaned up all the edges of the bottle. Now what I'm going to do is take this hole saw and basically put a hole in it. I have a hole saw for the smaller one. The bigger burner is about 65 millimeters, and I don't have anything bigger than a 55. So we're going to do the small one to start off with, then we'll figure out what to do for the bigger one. But first step is to center punch our mark. I've already marked it out. And then we're going to drill a small hole for the little inside drill bit to follow. And then we'll spend about an hour probably cutting through it with the hole saw. So in the last clip you will have seen me trying to drill through this piece of steel with the hole saw. It's basically just not working. I've tried a couple other ways. I've tried drilling holes in a perimeter around the circle. The steel just doesn't like to be drilled, I think. I don't know what about it is. It should just be mild steel, so it should go through, but it's not. What I'm going to do now, just because nothing else seems to be working, is I'm going to grab the angle grinder and I'm just going to cut into it a bunch of times to see if I can free up some of that material. So I'm just going to kind of attack it with an angle grinder, and then I'm going to switch kind of back and forth between the hole saw and the angle grinder, maybe drill bits, I don't know. We're just going to do whatever we can to get this hole in here. So that's what I'm going to do next. Alright, so it's not the prettiest hole in the world, but there is a hole through it and the burner fits in. I'm going to be welding a pipe to this that holds the burner, so it will look a lot prettier than this, but I'm going to move on to the second piece. I've got it down on the ground here. I'm going to start with the hole saw, see if it does any better. If it doesn't, then I'm just going to go back to using the angle grinder, cutting out a big hole. It'll look something like this one, only a lot bigger. So since the last clip, I have done a little test burner mount on the smaller of the two forges. I made the pipe because pipe is really expensive, so I just took some flat bar, curled it around in a pipe shape. It's not perfectly circular, but it fits the burner in, it's nice and tight, so that's good. It's also been welded at the correct angle for the forge. So my next step is to make some much thicker pipe with some much thicker bar, and we're gonna weld in a burner mount to this forge here. So in the last clip you saw me try to put the burner in and it didn't fit. Off camera, because I just needed to fix it, I decided to basically forge this around the horn and stretch the material lengthways all the way around, and now it fits. So what I've got to do now is see that hole right there. I have to basically hog out some material on each side of the hole so that I can fit this into that hole. And then I will weld it in, put the burner in, and test fit it. But those are my next steps, so I'm going to do that now. So the burner mount now just barely fits in. Of course there are a bunch of gaps around it, but I can kind of squeeze it, wedge it into place, and it fits right where it's supposed to be. So what I'm going to do now is clean up around the hole, and I'm going to weld everything together, fill all the gaps, and then wire brush it. Gonna do the welding now, and I will see you after that. So both burner mounts are welded in and they're looking good. The burners fit nicely where they're supposed to. So what I'm going to do now is take out the kale wool. You'll notice I'm outside just because it's particularly bad to breathe this stuff in. I've also got my respirator and my little kiradashi. So what I'm going to do is cut this big roll of kale wool up into little sections that fit inside each of the forge bodies. And then we're going to coat the kale wool in some refractory cement. So since the last clip, it's been about a week. I've let both forges dry. I've gotten the other one done too. What I'm going to do is paint the outside just because it looks a little gross and manky right now. Once I paint it, it'll look all nice. I'm just going to be using some of this high temperature exhaust paint. If you're using the right insulation, the outside's not going to get super hot at all, so this isn't super necessary. Mostly it's just for right around the openings. Those will be the areas that get really hot. So I'm going to paint it, and then we'll let that dry. Then we're going to get on to making the forge stand, which will be interesting. Currently the forges are drying, so what I'm going to get started on is the forge stand. You'll see how I've sort of made it in a way that makes the forge quite modular and able to be sort of changed around in terms of like whether I have a short forge or a long forge that's vertical. You'll see that in the end, but what I'm going to start out with are a bunch of these little pieces that are 180 mil long, and then 4 legs. I'm lucky that my steel supplier does free cutting, so I have a bunch of pieces already cut for me. What I'm going to do is just weld a square out of all of these, and then I'm going to add in some crossbars to strengthen the whole structure. But yeah, basically just going to get started on that now. So now that we've got the forge stand together, I've put the bottom of the argon bottle down the bottom. It's full of kale wool, and then I've put a layer of refractory over top. It's basically how I did the forge, but it's just a single cake of it. That's going to be so that the bottom doesn't catch fire, which is always nice. Now what I'm going to do is slot the bigger of the 2 forges right on top of that. Burner mount is going to come out this way. That way when the burner's in it, I can control the temperatures from this side of the forge rather than having to go around the back. And then I'm going to basically be figuring out forge shelves for the horizontal position of the smaller forge. The smaller forge can also be put in vertically, and that's how I'm going to heat treat the sword. But it's also got that horizontal position, which is going to be probably the position it's in 90% of the time. So got to figure that out, but first I'm just going to slot that bigger forge in. Obviously the last clip it was in the vertical position, here it is in the horizontal position. What I've got are 2 extra supports that I had cut. I'm going to cut these in half, and they're going to be welded to either side of the forge. And luckily I have some 16mm round bar, and that slots into these perfectly. So to that 16mm round bar I'm going to weld a plate, and that will be able to slot in and be taken out. So gonna get started on that. First step is cutting these out, and then I'm just gonna be welding some stuff up. So forge is done. It works really well. We've got a sort of vortex thing going on because of the angle of the burner, which is really, really ideal. The shelves work really well. They slide in and out just fine. It's got plenty of room on it for a brick. You can slide around. And yeah, it works in the vertical position too. I did test it. If you want to see it being used in the vertical position, I should have a video out soon of me heat treating a sword. So look out for that. For now, this is the forge. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.